Okay, so today I want to talk for a bit about a problem that's plaguing my mind, my life, as a 41-year-old man, particularly as a 41-year-old father. So I have five children in different stages, and the oldest one is 16, and she's a female, and she is now frequenting a school. And one of the primary reasons she went there is in order to meet people, hang out with people, meet boys, and other things. I think she's hopefully it looks like she's putting quite a lot of effort in the learning aspect as well, specifically. So hopefully that will lead to some fruits of some sort. But I want to specifically talk about the concept of pairing up. So I do not know how far I'm going to go in this video covering this particular thing. It may need multiple episodes, but whatever. We can start somewhere, can't we? So first things first, one needs to lay down some basics. So I am a child of the 80s. Therefore, I was a teenager of the early 2000s. Right? Now, I was a teenager in Italy in the early 2000s. Now, that was I feel, a very, 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 very different time. Very different time and very different people compared to what seems to be the case today. Whenever I see videos or content of various other kind that has to do with the relationship between males and females, I cannot help but seeing a world that I simply cannot recognize. It seems very, very, very ill, this world. It seems like the females are desperately attempting to be noticed, essentially, by males, between an eternal stream of makeup, fake hair color, fake everything, essentially, look and behavior. An enormous amount of strife, separations, divorce, this, that, the other, and so on. On the other side, the men seem to be completely over it at almost any age. And it's kind of difficult to tell what's real and what isn't. Like how much of it is an exaggeration and how much of it is, a product of the time or whatever, or a product of the algorithm that just promotes not confirmation bias, but sort of repetition, right? If you see content X, then content of type X will keep on appearing for you. So perhaps it's some of that. I don't know. But I have a distinct feeling that it's much more real than anybody is prepared to notice. So while the experts and everybody else have failed to notice the crisis of the collapse in population, which was obvious for everybody to see, I get the distinct feeling that only older people, particularly gentlemen, are noticing the complete collapse of any level of relationship that has any meaning between males and females. That, for me, is exceedingly worrying. Specifically for my children. For example, let's take females as a sort of starting point, right? What females look for in a male, generally, or should, that is actually an important distinction, but should look for a male, is somebody with principles, somebody generally strong, and somebody uh, somebody that isn't too dull. For example, somebody who's funny or otherwise brilliant. So the man needs to be both brilliant in the mind and brilliant in the body, so to speak. Now, by brilliant in the mind, I do not mean that one needs to be a CEO of a Fortune 500. And by brilliant in the body, I don't mean that somebody needs to be a bodybuilder. I don't even think that a man needs to be particularly athletic at all. I mean, I suppose not overweight would be ideal, but I'm not even sure that that's an enormous problem, right? It's somebody who needs to be reliable in the head, essentially. Somebody who will stand by his beliefs, somebody who will, put himself in harm's way should his female, but ideally any other female, to be honest, be somehow at risk. And then somebody who should firmly and fairly judge or attempt to understand the situation and then proceed accordingly. That's my understanding of what females should want. What males should want is, generally speaking, much easier, one would think, but it isn't. Because males have very, very, very few criteria in order to attempt to have a go of something with a female. Criteria number one, the female needs to be normal, vaguely. Meaning, she must not be ugly, right? Generally. She must be feminine, take care of herself from a basic perspective, that sort of thing, cleanliness, whatever. Must be pleasant. These are very, very, very simple things. And yet, the level of penury when it comes to the female market, based on my observation of it, in this area is pretty substantial. But, giving to Caesar that which belongs to Caesar, on the other side, it seems to be the same. So, what I'm observing as an older gentleman who has a dog in this fight, in fact has several dogs in this fight, is I'm observing males who seem to entirely refuse to want to grow up. And I mean like at every degree. I'm going to give a couple of examples in a moment. And on the other side, I see females that have no problem growing up, but they have zero interest at all in picking up any skill at all that has anything to do with homemaking. Anything, whatever you like. From cooking to cleaning to caring for youth or the weak or the needy or whatever. None, no skill that I think a man values in women is in any way promoted by anybody. And no skill that is valuable, skill is kind of the wrong word, no trait that is valuable in a man seems to be promoted by anybody on the other side. And what this seems to be producing is two sexes that have absolutely no interest in one another. And I don't think I'm saying anything particularly crazy or particularly exotic. Because if this is, if an interest that is, let's call it metaphysical, between the two sexes is absent, the only thing that is left is the physical. But the physical is valueless almost. It's cheap. So, if we, for example, as I started, I'm going to continue from that bit, I'm going to link to my youth. If we take a look at my youth, there's a very big contrast between my youth and now. So, when I want to say 16, I was definitely not mature enough to understand yet what it meant to in any way be interested or be with a female. Definitely, I remember this distinctly. I became meaningfully aware of what that meant in the clumsy way of youth at the age of 17, probably 17, 18, something like that. And I remember that there were loads of girls that were very attractive in various ways. Very attractive doesn't mean gorgeous. It just means that there were candidates that one could go after. What does go after mean? Well, you try to come out of your shell as a man. You try to essentially woo this person in some way, right? Talk to her, approach her, invite her places, accompany her home when it's dark, that sort of thing. All sorts of things that you would do as a young man to try and get closer to this particular girl. Never once in my life has it ever happened that I had two potential individuals that I was interested in at the same time. It might have happened that I had one, then was rejected and relatively swiftly moved to another. That may have occurred, but what has never happened is that there were multiple ones for me. And I was very happy that way. Basically, from my perspective, every girl that I was interested in was the girl that I was potentially going to settle down with. That's how I approached every one of my relationships. That is not what I see at all nowadays, at least not on the internet. Now it will vary from place to place, etc. And the internet is very global, so there are fallacies there, but still, like, folks talk about having people on a side as a default thing. That is inconceivable to me. Right? So that's one bit of the premise. The second bit of the premise is, along with this came a lack of general promiscuity. Right? If one were to ask me, what's your body count, Mike? Or something to that effect, right? Which means, how many people have I been with intimately? It would be 5, I think. 5 including the wife, who was the last one. I think it's 5. Is it 5? It's 5. Should be 5. Or it's 4. 4.5. Right? Sorry, I didn't think about this before doing this. But yeah, so very, very few by modern standards. Right? There are people that talk about, numbers that I find completely inconceivable. Like, I don't know, 200 was the what? I don't think I've ever met 200 people. In this way, I don't think I've met and meaningfully got to know the name of 200 women in my life. I'm not sure, to be honest, right? But it's an enormous number from my perspective. So it seems to me that the idea that I had, and that it seemed like I didn't seem to be particularly weird. My peers also had girlfriends, and everybody would have a girlfriend for half a year, that's sort of like 2 years, or some forever, right? And obviously the same would apply for the girls. And whenever there was a breakup, it was meaningful. It wasn't that easy to get over. Everything felt more meaningful compared to what I seem to be observing. Now, with this entire situation, acknowledge that nowadays everything seems to be much more precarious from this perspective. What seems to me to be the case in the near future is that there's going to be a lack, and I mean a complete absence of any contact at all. That is crazy. The boys that my daughter is meeting is learning of, is coming to know in her own class, but around her, these are very, very, very poorly adapted young fellows. Confidence is impossible to find in them. Some are openly, psychologically perturbed, like they have anxiety or this, that, and the other, which makes them astonishingly unattractive, I would think. Like that level of pathological lack of confidence. I mean, if you're anxious, The one thing you can't possibly ever have is confidence. At least, I would imagine at that age in particular, when your body is as healthy as it will ever be. So there's that. And that's very odd to me. But like I said, on the other side, the girls are possibly overconfident, completely unfeminine, while dressing like 304s as a default status. Like, I remember girls when I was young. They were dressed normally, you know. I remember an old YouTuber that I discovered like almost a decade ago. Her name was Christy O'Misty, and one time she quoted her own father, and apparently her father had said, "My girls are allowed to look pretty, they're not allowed to look sexy, because one makes you want to look, the other one makes you want to take a bite." It seems to me that every female 15 and up, heck 13 and up now, has an Instagram account with filters on it and extremely explicit, perhaps not so explicit, but implicit or both, I'm not sure. Anyway, forward sexual attitudes, that aggressive. That is weird. Because that's attractive in a certain sense, of course. But to a man who is not ready, that is intimidating. But intimidating not in the sense that one is worried about it or etc. One simply goes, no, I don't think this interests me. I think this is leading young men to be much more, to remain younger for longer. Like, I'm sure all of us will recall being very, very young, like elementary school type age, and thinking that females were just this sort of other that we needed to be away from as males. Like, the females hung out with the females and the males hung out with the males, and it was great that way at that age, right? It's when one reaches adolescence that this type of line blurs a little bit. But when I was young, I remember distinctly, it was important or interesting to me to find a girlfriend. It was a mission. I am under no impression at all that young fellas have that. And we're talking about substantially advanced age, like 17, 18, 19, still nothing. I've spoken with, many would be a strong word, but several of them that aren't members of my family. The quantity of people who are on their way to potentially starting a family at some point is zero. None. So, my daughter, who is fairly mature from this perspective, she's immature from many others, but at least this one, she's quite keen on having her first story of this sort. And I'm not sure what I'm supposed to say. Because as a father, generally speaking, you try to make your female children understand that they need to be careful in that sphere. There is, they are vulnerable, much more vulnerable than a male would be. And I find that this particular story is completely reversed now. Like, I find myself thinking that my son is consistently in danger. He's much younger, but that he will be consistently in danger. He needs to be very aware of the situation. Could be baby trapped, could be all sorts of ridiculous things could happen to him. Could be accused of, you know what? Falsely, right? And what do you do as a young man if that happens? Especially when all of the narrative is ready to have your head chopped off. Well, you retreat, obviously. Or you proceed with extreme caution, which is complete nonsense, because as somebody who's courting somebody, you have to throw caution to the wind. That is the point. Otherwise, how do you break through? So, I think I'm going to conclude it now that I'm at the 20-minute mark. But yeah, basically, as a father, I'm struggling a fair bit in this area because I really do not know what's right to do. And the world is so different from what I recognized as matching my understanding of how things ought to work, that it makes it very difficult to navigate. Because if I do what's safe eternally, and I simply suggest to everybody to be very, very risk averse, both males and females, I just make the situation worse. There's just no contact, you know? So, anyway, I'll close it here and then I'll see if I'll follow this up another day. We shall see. Bye bye.